Hello. We have Dr. Arminio, Joseph Arminio with us, and I'm going to just read a little bit about his background, and then we're going to get started. Dr. Arminio has taught at the American University and Lincoln University, and he founded Statesman Debate Institute, SDI, which provides classically based speech and debate coaching for secondary and college students. And he didn't do it in a formal way. I think he's done it more, as he would like to say, as a practitioner. And in debating was a way to become a commentator on economics and statecraft. Also, the other thing is Dr. Arminio has served as a consultant to members of Congress and the Defense Department. And I know he's been part for a number of years. Each year there's a National Defense Authorization Act that he has been involved with from time to time, working on that for some years. He chaired the National Coalition for Defense, whose board numbered nearly 50 major personages, including sitting members of Congress and retired flag officers. And he's MIT awarded the doctorate in political science on the strength, and then on the strength of his latest book, Dr. Arminio sounds the alarm regarding digital currency and stablecoin through his project Turning Point 2025. Dr. Arminio, how does that sound? Can you add a little bit to that? And then I want to go on, if please adjust that, and then if I could say another word of how we might go into dialogue tonight.
Well, I think my audience might be most interested in the fact that I didn't have a clue about banking. I thought I did, but I really didn't have a clue about banking until the year 2013. In 2008, I ran for the U.S. House in the 2008 Republican primary in Maryland. And at that time, I was an advocate for the gold standard. I was in the hands of so-called conservative economists. And then 5 years later, I found out that I had been led down the path. And that's when I discovered public banking. Now, and I think that my discovery is not that unusual. I declare myself to be an authentic conservative. I always ask people, well, what are you conserving? And they're always puzzled when I ask them that question. Well, I'm conserving the republic, the American republic. That's what I'm conserving. But I am concerned, though, that my colleagues in the conservative movement might, without them realizing it unwittingly, are in fact conserving private central banking. And I was one who was conserving private central banking until the year 2013. I didn't realize that the gold standard is actually one of the tools that the private central banker uses at the right time. I didn't realize that they condition us. That is, they in the conservative movement and elsewhere, other parts of the country, other elements of the country, they condition us to think that the gold standard is a good thing when they're in their inflationary period. And then when they want to come out of it and go into the deflationary, that's when they impose the gold standard on us at that time. Anyway, these were all things that I discovered around the year 2013. I was shocked, frankly, quite shocked. Now, prior to these things, before I ran for the U.S. House, probably the most important thing I did was I chaired a national defense policy advocacy group in Washington, D.C. And Stephen, you referred to that. So we had about 50 members of the board, including several members of Congress, U.S. Senator James Inhofe at the time from Oklahoma. He was sitting U.S. Senator at the time. Two other congressmen. We had a number of flag officers, including someone who served as Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet under President Reagan. So at those times, my background, my MIT degree is actually in national defense policy. And I found out that I was being misled there too. That's a longer story. And that got me to ask, well, what's behind all this? And I began looking, and I began to discover that there's something about monetary policy I need to know, and there's something the bankers are doing to us that I need to know about. And yet you can imagine, I begin this quest to get to the bottom of everything approximately the year 1998. And it's not until the year 2013 that, in effect, I find all of you. I didn't know you existed. I didn't know public banking advocates existed. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And I'm not unusual. I think most of my colleagues are where I am now. They believe in the gold standard. They have no idea about public banking. When they hear the word public, they're actually aghast. They think this is some kind of socialist measure. bunch. Of course, we know it's not. It's authentically American. In fact, it goes back, what, several thousand years.
Thank you, Joseph. And somewhere along the line, was it in 2013, you must have, in public banking, you must have then learned about Ellen Brown and the Public Banking Institute?
No, I didn't learn about her that quickly. What happened was I was wanting to write a U.S. history textbook for high school. And I said, I better be rigorous. I better really work the primary sources. And I stumbled across this thing called colonial script. I had never heard of this. This was my beginnings. So it was the primary sources, in other words, that opened my eyes. It was only sometime after that I began to find these great thinkers in the field like Stephen Zarlenga or Ellen Brown, what have you. I had no idea. Now, prior to that time, though, I thought I had found the great thinkers in the field. That would be Edmund Griffin. I always get his first two names wrong. Is it Edward or Edmund, I think? Mr. Griffin, Creature
Yeah.
from Jekyll Island. And in fact, I almost slept with it. I mean, I read that book and devoured it from the time I had it in my hands in the early 1990s. And then I find out 20 years later I'd been taken. Not completely, because he's got a lot of good things in that book. It's a very informative book, only it's selective. Like all those other so-called conservative economists, or most of them that I had trusted so. They're selective in their use of economic history, as Stephen Zarlenga made very clear to us. And I thank God he did.
Okay. Okay. Now, you use the term public, and you're worried about that term, or it's a socialist term. How would you, if you were to talk to conservative people, conservatives, how would you express yourself then?
Well, I'm not worried about the term myself any longer. That's what I want. But I know most of my fellow conservatives would be aghast at that idea. I tell them all the time, you have to understand when you're talking about the government, especially the federal government, or even the state government, you're really talking about the face of private central banking. This is their intermediary that they, in effect, lord over us through them. So stop thinking about something public as the enemy or the government as the enemy. It's what's behind the government that matters.
So, okay, and you use another term, and you use it in your book too, and you're concerned about it, and that's the term global or the globalist.
The globalist, yeah. Well, again,
Talk
yes.
about.
So the globalist, the problem with that, it's a very vague term, isn't it, Stephen? It's very vague. Who are these people? And that's, I think, also deliberate. Again, when people in the conservative movement think about globalism, they almost typically think about, well, nowadays, if they've read some, they'll think about the World Economic Forum. And that, I would argue, is actually, in a sense, another face of the bankers, in particular the Bank for International Settlements. They don't know about the Bank for International Settlements, by the way, which is why on the cover of my book, The Fed's Endgame, which is my seventh book, my most recent book came out this spring, I have on the front cover the usual. If you read a book about the Fed, it seems you're always going to see a picture of the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, D.C. So I have that too, but I have behind it, actually looming over it on a cloud, the tower in Basel, Switzerland, for the BIS, for the Bank for International Settlements. I can tell you, most of my colleagues never heard of the BIS. They've heard of the WEF, but not the BIS. So I think the WEF, to some degree, it's a debate society, but it also serves to some degree as a distraction. And that's another part of it that's interesting. So the founder of that, Klaus Schwab, is what we could say, I guess, a protege of three Americans, Galbraith, Kissinger, and Herman Kahn. Herman Kahn would be right in my field. He was all about nuclear policy. At least I thought so when I was in graduate school. And Kissinger overlaps foreign policy and domestic, but mostly on the foreign side. And then you have Galbraith mostly on the domestic. People don't realize that the World Economic Forum was, in a sense, an American or Anglo-American invention placed on European soil. But then again, there's so much intermingling between what the European elite do, what we do, the Japanese elite. Who's to say it's American, European, or what have you? They intermarry, they intermingle. Who knows? But I think a lot of Americans, if they do hear about the WF, have this sense that, oh, this must be some European conception. And maybe, maybe.
Well, thinking, okay, let's go back to when you talk to conservatives and you're trying to bring up the issue of how to go forward. And you're a bit worried about now banks as corporations and the power they have. How do you begin to express that to them?
Well, I do it while thinking about my colleagues in the progressive ranks. I think about both at the same time. What I've noticed, tell me if I'm wrong here. I have the impression that each side is weighed down. Each side carries a burden, and somehow, and I think, well, I don't know if this was deliberate or not, but somehow it fragments us. And this is a major point I would make. So with conservatives, and I've already alluded to this before, most of my colleagues swear by the gold standard. And something else they swear by is the US Constitution, which isn't a bad document, but they don't understand the monetary policy that was expressed in the US Constitution has problems. They don't realize that. So that's a problem with the right. So now my feeling with the left or the progressives is they actually hold the keys. They understand monetary policy, and I've learned a lot from them. They're tremendous. What worries me, though, they also carry around a ball and chain. They drag us behind them, and they tend to take what I would call globalist positions, for instance, in the case of climate change. So each side is impeded to some degree, and that's another point I would make to you. And we talked about this beforehand. What can we do to get true monetary reform? I think the first thing we've got to do, we've got to close ranks. And I would plead with the conservative, please understand what the gold standard is. It's a tool of private central banking. It's not a good thing. Try to grasp that. And then with the progressive, I would say, could you come in a neutral fashion, maybe the way that Stephen Zarlenga would have done it? Would you come in not talking about the applications of monetary theory, how the money we say we can spend on project XYZ? Just leave that out of the equation. Of course, I'm pleading, please leave out the climate change business. Leave that out because the conservative's not going to talk to you. If you come in with that, he'll think of that as baggage. So leave that behind. Maybe you're right. I don't want to get into that debate, but leave it behind if you can. And we've got to work on the right and get them to let go of the gold standard. And how do we do that? Well, I got an idea. How we do that.
Okay, does it have well, go ahead.
All right, well, conservatives revere the US Constitution. And what worries me about them is, and I'm not sure I was quite as enamored as they are, but what worries me about them is they talk about the Constitution as if it's the gospel, as if it's equivalent to the gospel. It's not the gospel. It's man-made and it has a serious monetary flaw, but they don't know about that flaw. They have no idea. But they do revere it. And they often will say, let's go back to it. I run into people all the time. They'll even hand me business cards. They'll say, I'm a constitutionalist. I'm thinking, if you only knew. You sure you want to be a constitutionalist? Do you realize, if I'm getting this correctly, my study of the economic history that all of you have really done for me, because I'm standing on your shoulders. Nothing that I've done really is really new. I'm standing on your shoulders. My observation is that the Constitution had this, well, I hate to say fatal flaw, monetary flaw, and that's why we're in the mess we're in today. We didn't resolve it correctly. That's why. In fact, I can go into that further, and that's my next most recent book, Prime for Resurgence, that deals with the errors that the conservative movement has picked up, especially on monetary policy. But what I'm suggesting, though, is if we can get the conservative to go back to the U.S. Constitution and look at the primary sources, drop all your prejudices or everything you think about the subject, just look at the Constitution, they will respond to that. They will discover that we were taken, or they will discover that, as I always say, there was a clash between private central banking forces in the US Constitution and public banking forces in the US Constitution. Some kind of compromise was agreed upon in August of 1787, but that the private central bankers then stole a march on the public banking forces, and we've been reeling ever since. We try to get back in the ring. They're always throwing us out of the ring. And so anyway, this back and forth goes on from 1787 to 1913, and now the private central banking forces are pretty much ruling the roost, and they have going to great lengths to stamp out even knowledge of public banking. And yet this is central to American history. I need to blame myself. I didn't read widely enough, but then again, I'm like most of my fellow conservatives. We didn't know any better. I honestly didn't know any better. I didn't know where to look. Everybody tells me.
I was on the other side, and I was, the Vietnam War was winding down, and I was trying to find, I was got out of college and looking for something good to do for society, and I, I had a political science degree,
Huh?
and I was looking for, some good cause, and I didn't find it because I didn't have Zarlenga around. And I told Zarlenga, and he quoted it, that uh, if we, we would, and I'm saying this as a youth back then, we didn't know what to do next, but we would have known what to do next if Zarlenga had been around.
Uh-huh.
One comment I want to make too, because that's when the environmental movement begins. And I'm in monetary reform, I as being a steward of AMI, I meet a lot of people, and I earlier Nick brought up climate change and everything. All I know is I have experiences. I've lived with Eskimos and or Siberian Yupik people, and I know something about their ice conditions and bowhead whales and some of the issues they're facing. But then in my conversations, there can be a lot of reasons for a lot of different things. But I think what's clear is that my conservative friends, and correct me if I'm wrong, they want healthy, they want clean water,
Oh, they do.
they want a clean environment, they want clean soil for their food. They, and so there's so much of an overlap there. That's how we can join arms. That's how I try to join arms, and we can. We we don't harp on the things we're not sure about, but we can harp on the things we agree, and we can march together and talk to others about it because that's where the commonality is. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. Now, that brings up something, but before we go, at some point, I hope we talk about stablecoin.
We will.
Because
I don't.
it's also
That's
crucial.
coming soon.
Now, that's the title of my talk, is the dire peril of stablecoin, and we've done nothing but talk about everything. We've not talked about it at all, but anyway, um, one thing I propose in my book, and it's not unique to me, I don't think, but I call it an American infrastructure bank. And you mentioned Ellen Brown, and I revere Ellen Brown. I love her work. I love what she does. Web of Debt is a book I wish I had found much sooner than I did. I'm ashamed to say I didn't find it in 2013. A couple of years went by before I found it. But she promotes something called National Infrastructure Bank, and I'm promoting, so that's the NIB, and I promote what I call an AIB. There's the only difference, well, there's two differences in mine. The first is the strategic difference, and she will bring in a non-monetary agenda that I wish she wouldn't. And my AIB leaves that alone. We don't deal with environmental issues or anything that's not strictly the financial concept where you're repurposing debt. But the other part of this is I take the idea of the Bank of North Dakota and blend it with her idea of the NIB. And so when I run the numbers, so I love most of what she's doing. In fact, you look at our financial concepts; they're the same where this infrastructure issue is concerned. It's just that she's spending the savings on something I wouldn't spend it on. But I bring that up because we need her idea. It's a really terrific idea. And of course, she goes back to Reconstruction Finance Corporation. She goes back to Alexander Hamilton and so forth and says, let's get that done in Congress. And there are a lot of Democrats who like the idea. The problem is the right side of the aisle will not touch it. They will not touch it at all. It goes back to my central point. There is some baggage that on the left we carry, I fear. There's some baggage on the right we carry, clear that we carry. We need to jettison all this baggage and join forces and then present our thoughts to Congress.
Mm-hmm. Well, part of that's going to be the stable coin. And right now we have cryptocurrency, which it's its own animal in the digital world. And we have stablecoin, which is another digital animal. but we're going to try to tie it to the dollar. And when you tie stablecoin to the dollar, there's issues there too, and there's been a lot of misleading by the stablecoin people themselves. But I don't want to get into it. I would like you to tell that story and from how you see it. And
Stablecoin, I sometimes think of stablecoin as the last nail in the coffin or one of the last nails. So yeah, you're right. The idea is that you're going to represent the dollar with something digital. But what we need to understand is that that something digital needs to be backed by something, and that something that's going to be backed by are treasuries.
mhm.
So this is a way to offload the debt. So
What do you mean?
the problem, we have several problems with folks on Congress. And by the way, I've been fighting hard, lobbying against several bills, or one bill in particular, since the spring. That has to do with the Genius Act, which I'm very, very distressed about. The stable coin is appealing to the politician because he thinks he can solve the debt problem, says solve. In other words, defer the problem. You can increase the debt. So remember, the debt consists in effect of obligations to finance treasury bonds. Well, if we are having trouble financing treasury bonds, remember, Stephen, I have a chart that I want to share, which has to do with that problem of financing treasury bonds. It's figure 8 in my book. If we want to finance treasury bonds, one way to do it is with stablecoin. As more people, as the appetite for stablecoin increases, you can then have an excuse to commit more treasury bonds to back up the stablecoin so that the debt can get bigger and bigger. And you see, the politicians loves this because he doesn't have to solve the debt crisis. He says he is, but he knows he's really not. He's just letting the debt crisis get bigger.
Okay.
So that's one appeal for stablecoin, why he likes it. Now, it's also the latest technology, the gadgetry. So there's, the latest glittering toy. That's, of course, a minor reason, but be surprised they talk about America maintaining its innovation edge around the world. That is something you hear around the halls of Congress all the time. But there's another side to this, and this is what's so frightening. The other side of this is that stablecoin will be the end of us. They will tell us through stablecoin in short order what we can buy and sell. Now, the stablecoin isn't the only piece of this. It's one of the crucial pieces in this digitization of property of the world, this country, and of ourselves as part of that process. But it ultimately will take us to that point. That's where we need to prevent that from happening. So what we have is people say, well, through stablecoin, we could defer debt crisis for another 10 years. Well, actually, we may not get that far because far before the 10 years are up, if you have most Americans using stablecoin and a lot of people abroad using stablecoin, all it takes is for the issuers of the stablecoin, which are the ones permitted to issue by Congress, it's a very tightly controlled circle, to flip the switch and tell us what we can buy and sell, and the game's over. So that this is a calamity waiting to happen. We have to stop this thing. But let's go back to the major lure that you get to increase the debt and not have to deal with the debt crisis until later, if at all. Remember, who is benefiting? And I think your prior participants before I came on, I listened a little bit as they were coming, before I came on. The problem is that who really benefits from the debt-based money system? The super rich. So what we're doing is we're perpetuating their system. They'll grow all the richer and we won't. So, and what do they do with that money? Well, that's another discussion, but I think a lot of that money goes to fomenting mischief, maybe even wars here or there. So the less they have, the better. It doesn't mean we're trying to put them in the pauper's house and make them poor. We're not trying to do that at all. What we're trying to share the means of production and share the wealth. And stablecoin further concentrates the wealth. You never hear that up on the Hill, even by opponents of stablecoin. They don't talk that way. Though a few of them will talk about the peril to liberty, the fact that we may be told one day what we can buy and sell. And by the way, how is that possible? Let's look at the operational or the technical side of stablecoin. Stablecoin use the same software as a central bank digital currency. And conservatives, by the way, do not like central bank digital currency. They don't like it. Now, follow me here because, again, how do we get to the conservatives? So I've got a thought here. Conservatives, I can tell you, don't like CBDC. In fact, they didn't like it so much so that this was a major plank in President Trump's presidential campaign starting in the summer last year. And then when he's in office only a couple of weeks, I guess it was the end of January of this year, he issues an executive order. There shall be no stable coin. I think it's Executive Order 14178. And yet he pushes another in Congress push Genius Act, which did pass, which is a backdoor to a central bank digital currency. Well, how is it a backdoor? Because stablecoin uses the same software as a CBDC. It's surveillable. You can survey whoever uses it and has it. It's programmable. Again, tell them what they can buy and sell if you want to, shut down their bank account, and it can be seized. And it has been. We've already surveyed, programmed, and seized people with stablecoin. Tether and Circle are stablecoin coins out there, digital coins, and they have been shut down. The Department of Justice saw some people using Tether, I believe, and they didn't like the way it's being used. So they talked to the issuer and said, "Would you please seize those accounts?" They said, "Aye, aye, sir," and they did. There's already precedents for this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but go back to the point of how do we bring in the conservative? So remember, the conservative hates a CBDC. If we can tell them that the stable coin is the way to get the very thing they hate, they'll pay more attention. But if they pay attention to stable coin, they're now starting to pay closer attention to the monetary policy than ever before. I mean, we talk about the debt. The problem with the debt is it's been over our heads for how long? Of course, having said that, lightning is about to strike. But for how long has it been over our heads? Stablecoin knows, in terms of public consciousness, has just arrived. So it's got this novelty to the threat, and it can get people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other thing that's very crucial, conservatives like their cash. Cash is king. That's one of their favorite expressions. So you haven't heard that in a while. That will get their attention. And so once you get their attention on stablecoin, you tell them, look, we've got this problem. Next step, they'll say, well, but what are we going to do with the debt crisis? So you're telling us that it's a false solution to the debt crisis. It puts me in bondage one day, or runs the risk that I'll be put in bondage. So I don't want that. But you're telling me that it's a false solution to the debt crisis. Well, how do you solve the debt crisis? And that's when I turn to you, Stephen, and all your colleagues who've preceded me. And that's where we draw upon the American Monetary Institute and Zarlenga's thinking, Ellen Brown, other people, and we lay out the solution. Now you've got the attention of the conservative. You see, it's a step-by-step process. But the other problem is we need to do it rapidly. It's not happening. And I can discuss that because in the last 5-6 months, I've made the rounds on the Hill several times, especially with the Freedom Caucus on the conservative side of the House. I tried to work with Democrats. I've also looked at the media. It's frightening what's going on out there. It's frightening. There's virtually no public awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for that, by the way, I fear.
Well, let me interject a little bit of Zarlenga's thinking
Okay.
and something nice about cash that he said that you would appreciate. And then I want to go back to 1970.
Okay.
But and
that was a good year, right?
well, it was a turning point for some things to come soon. And Zarlenga wanted there was a flaw in the Constitution, we're saying, and the flaw was it really didn't understand money, the founding fathers.
Yes, correct.
And if they had understood it better, they would have given it its right place early on as a fourth branch of government.
Yes.
And make it formally a public institution and maybe somewhat independent, but there would be a monetary authority, but it would be separated from Congress and the spending side. And we had to figure it out. They needed to figure it out then. It didn't happen. So one of the points when we think about this, and Zarlenga's mentioned this, is the NEED Act wants to go back, and just to use your words a moment ago, after you get rid of the nonsense of the debt-based money, the banks being able to put in 97% of what we call our circulating money, our public money.
Right.
If you can even think think of that once you understand it. The problem, um, the banking system has way much to control. And when you describe it, you go into what's called 1, 2, 3 tiers of banking. And let me explain that a little bit. And I want to tell you where Zarlenga would take it all, or in my thinking too. And I'll get to that in a second. And I'll ask what your response is. We have, by some descriptions of great, just pure monetary thinkers, I'm thinking of Joseph Huber, he talks about a 2-tier, and in orally, he's talked about 3 tiers, and I'll explain that. The basic tier, we'll call it our cash system. It's what the Federal Reserve brings out as coin, if you will, and we'll just stay with coin. We won't deal with bills right now. That gets slightly more complicated. Okay, you have coin and you have that as cash, and we had the greenbacks as cash, and we can get back to that. The next level or tier is banks creating money, and that's not a good tier to have. On top of that, and now I'm going to go back to 1970. What happened, and this is a story for everyone real quickly, we had an interest rate cap called Q, just the letter Q, and it was a 5% maximum interest rate. So no bank could charge more than 5% interest. Well, in the 1970s, inflation was high. Interest rates for good customers needed to be high, so they weren't going to come down. So two financial innovating bankers came up with money market mutual funds.
Oh, okay.
And in that way, they created a side-by-side money, and in the 70s it was so, but it became more and more relevant. And what the deal was, when they allowed this money, when the government and the Fed allowed this money to come into existence, they said you can trade and do things with it, but it can never be backed by the US government. It can never be backed by the Fed. Lo and behold, during our Great Recession, there's some big crises, and over half of the stock market was money market mutual funds and this shadow banking that we now call it. And that's described. We can get into that sometime. And I call that like the third tier. So there's bank created money, and this other created money, the banks are often the ones creating this other tier money, but they can't put it on their regular ledger because it's not supposed to be FDIC insured anymore. So that requires a new ledger. And that new ledger, the bankers call it a special purpose vehicle. And believe it or not, that special purpose vehicle is a corporation, and it's an LLC, limited liability corporation. You'll love it. So they can't get in trouble. It's a limited liability deal for a corporation, and it does nothing but serve the purpose of creating money on paper. And
Isn't this what came apart in 2008? It was the shadow banking.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That was, by the way, one of the things that shocked me when I was writing this Fed's Endgame, my 7th book. I was shocked. I had to conclude that we'd really lost control of banking in the 90s. By the 1990s, the speculative derivatives had run wild. The shadow banking was running wild, and that we had a number of major banks that were really in receivership, that were just being painted over like pigs and given a new name, and the taxpayer was bailing them out. Ellen Brown does a nice job chronicling a lot of this period, and I relied upon her to some extent. Not the only one, but she did a nice job with that, I think. Yeah, so this
let me get to the point. You'll like this part.
Okay.
After the Need Act and having reform, and there's really now, in this point, Ellen Brown and AMI are we all want public money basically.
Yeah,
And,
me too.
and,
Me too.
and,
Count me in.
and step number one is public banking, and Ellen Brown is taking that first strong intermediate step to go for public banking. AMI is saying, okay, public banking, yes, but we have to think our focus has to be on with Congress and changing the national system. That's where the moral issue is, the moral problem is. And so what is left after the Need Act? And you know what Zarlenga's simple answer was? And he and I, we came to it in a simple conversation. Just a cash system. All accounting money should be cash accounting money. And it's just not one, it's
Yeah.
a 2-tier or 3-tier. It's just a 1-tier system, and it's all cash. It's all the same thing. And there's no hocus pocus of money being shifted around. So if someone's making a loan, it's an equity loan. You're putting your money. If you want an investment in the banking and you want to earn interest, well, you got to put up with a little bit of risk.
Yeah. See, that's
your money.
I totally understand it. Yeah, you have to tie the lender and the borrower together. You have to put the lender at greater risk than they're put under, and that forces them to look into productive enterprise and also to stay away from speculative. But we have a system that goes just the opposite direction. I was going to say, Stephen, before we get too much further, I do want to share this figure on figure 8 that we talked about.
Yeah. You know what? I hadn't really thought, but I'm going to share my screen right now.
Okay,
I'm going to go to your book, and you're going to help me get there. And I'm going to get.
Brother.
I don't know. We're on the other. Let's see how fast I can do this. Let's go.
It's near the end of chapter 2.
Okay.
You see, for those who are watching, they may not know that. So my book, The Fed's Endgame, is available via Amazon. It's only at the moment an ebook. It's not a hard copy. And so
I know that
it's difficult to figure out what page are we talking about here.
Yeah,
it depends on what device you're using, what's page.
It wasn't the U.S. debt one, is it?
No. Okay, figure 8, interest-bearing public debt maturing in 1 year or less.
Okay, let me go back. Hang on.
So it's toward the end of chapter 2.
Okay, let's go back. I'm gonna go. I got to move my things around. We got some questions coming up.
Okay, and I hope everybody is everyone going to be able to see this chart?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
Because you and I are so special, they'll see. They can enlarge it. So here's a list of figures.
Okay.
And do we see which one we want to share now? Because we can go straight to it. I wasn't sure if I was fine. U.S. debt as share of GDP, that's the one. U.S. private debt, credit as shares of GDP.
No, that's not. That's
number 8, didn't he?
No, this is figure 8.
Oh, interest.
It's at the very end of chapter 2.
Okay, let's go.
That's how I find it on the Amazon version. See, I'm working off of a PDF, so I'm cheating.
Okay. Is that larger for people now? Or is it still small?
Oh, you found it. I think, I see it I see it. Yeah.
People can enlarge it on their own.
But is it big enough for them?
Is that okay? I made it larger, so you're not seeing that. I've got another way to do that then.
You see it, Stephen, fine.
Okay. So it's 1990, 2000. We have what, 1 trillion in debt, and 2000 in the crash.
Well, can you make it bigger for folks?
Okay, hang on.
Just that short.
Let me.
People can do it on our end by
expanding their screen.
Dots.
Yeah.
At the top of this.
It's actually quite visible.
It is. Oh, somebody's saying they can see it. Okay. Okay.
Okay, and then I'm not able to expand my screen.
We see it fine, Stephen.
Okay, I'm going to be quiet.
Oh, you can see it? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you can see here that it begins year 2000. It takes us up to not quite our present year.
Right.
And you have trillions on the left-hand scale. So this is this is terrifying, and every American needs to see this chart. So remember, our dollars are backed by treasuries. That's all we have backing them. And so it turns out now that this chart is showing you what percentage of GDP in treasuries you have to mature, you have to roll over, find a buyer for every year. And if you don't, your system collapses. So you can see what's happening here. We're done, and we're at the very end. So you can see that back in year 2000, we only needed to find only 10% of, rather, the interest-bearing public debt that was maturing, the treasury bonds that were maturing, only amounted to 10% of our GDP. I say only, right? And now look at the chart in 2025, it's up to 40% of our GDP. I mean, this is a catastrophe. And so this consists of the ongoing treasuries they keep rolling over and over, and plus whatever the federal deficit is for that year. That's where you get your numbers.
Now,
so,
I just want to give people a sense, because some people heard something. And for those of you who heard Nick's presentation, he gave you Richard Hemphill's 1930s quote, 1933. It was a forward in Irving Fisher's book. All of our money is created as debt.
Yes, that's right.
It's coming in. And
virtually
all here. What Joseph is saying here, we have such an overhang of having to look and pay off debt. We would have to work 5-6 months just to pay off interest that we couldn't even be living yet, basically.
That's right. So what happened is most of the public doesn't know this. I suppose Congress knows this. I wonder about them. Back in 2022, 2023, the bond market went into crisis. And so what happened is, if you wanted to sell your treasury bonds in the height of that crisis, which was 2 years ago, roughly, or 3 years ago, you could, but at a terrible loss. In many cases, a third to a half. So it would wipe you out. So a lot of folks, including big banks, are hanging on to their treasury bonds, hoping things will get better. And those who had to sell out, well, it was terrible. What it meant was it shook the global financial system, because the US dollar is backed by treasuries. Treasuries are supposed to be fluid. You're supposed to be able to get a buyer and a seller instantaneously at par value. Now you could only get a buyer, a taker, if you were going to, lose half of the value or a third of the value. So the stability in the dollar was gone. It was shot. So people say, oh, we're not careful. And you hear this on the Hill, Capitol Hill. We don't do something about the debt. We're going to lose, the dollar will lose its reserve status. Countries won't use it. We already lost reserve status. It was over 2 or 3 years ago. The only reason why we still have the dollar is still king around the world is because the alternative isn't quite there yet. So we're in terrible trouble. And so it's just, in any time now, we're out of business, which is why stablecoin, you see, seems to be so attractive to the politician. He looks at, some of them do look at this chart and they say, my God, you mean that I have to come up with buyers for equivalent to almost half of my GDP every year just to get by? Let me have stablecoin. Let me offload the treasury bonds onto something else. That's why it's so appealing to them. But that problem, as we said before, it's appealing, but there's 2 catches. Number one, those who benefit from the debt-based system get even richer, and we see that the mischief that they're tempted to foment, that's a huge ongoing problem. And number 2, if enough people use stablecoin, we're going to be in a digital prison. So it's a false solution to the debt crisis, and it's a ticking time bomb. But you see, it's so tempting in the short term.
Okay. I got 2 thoughts. One, we got people with questions. We don't have.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything to conclude, and I want to get back to the conservative.
Well, the conclude is on the bigger picture here. We have a terrible problem with my colleagues. We're in and I was one of them. If you talked to me before 2013, I was a fanatical gold standard enthusiast. I was a gold bug. completely believe. And I thought I understood. This is another thing I run into among conservatives. Oh, I got that. I get that. No, you don't have it. But they think they do. I thought I had got it. You pick up Griffin's book, Creature from Jekyll, you're good now. No, you're not, but you think you are. You think you are. And why is that? This is something that conservatives need to understand, because I believe the private central bankers have funded a lot of these think tanks and these authors to come at you to convince you that you know everything you need to know. All right, so that's the bigger point here.
Okay.
So how do we get the conservatives to open their mind?
Some people have spoken earlier. I want to go to Ellen Brown first, and then I got to get to John Root second because he's been missed too many times. But he is going to speak, so only a little bit, John. You're going to get your time in a little bit too. Okay, Ellen, I missed you with Michael Hudson on Tuesday. I don't know where you were.
I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
It was a big birthday, a number I'm not even going to repeat, but my whole family showed up from overseas. And so I've been totally busy right up until now. They're now gone. But I just wanted to say thank you for your kind remarks on my work and books and stuff. And on the stablecoin thing, it's true that they're programmable, and it's true that the government can, tell the issuer to, do different things, and they'll do it, shut down accounts or whatever. But that's also true of regular private banks. I mean, I think the problem really isn't the stablecoin, which has many useful features. I mean, I think ultimately, like the BRICS are going to come up with a blockchain-based system where they can exchange without a central bank or without banks. Basically the blockchain will. Anyway, I think it is the wave of the future, or it's an attempt to. I'm not expressing this very well, but I just wanted to say. I have one other comment I want to make on the national infrastructure. On the national infrastructure bank. I didn't write that bill, and I can't take credit for it at all. I just write about it and I speak at their presentations, but I agree with you on what infrastructure should. I mean, actually, I don't usually admit this, but I actually lean conservative myself, but I have to walk the middle line because, like you say, you've got to cater to the things that everyone agrees on. What we need is cooperation. We could do so much. If we had a country that worked together, we could do so much. Just like in the 1930s and 40s, when, like, if you have a war on, but we don't want a war, but if you have a war on, people will suddenly agree to fund all sorts of things that otherwise they would have been arguing about in Congress. So, and the Chinese have demonstrated that as well. I mean, you can do so much if you have a central bank that works with your federal government instead of being independent.
Well, let me respond to Ellen, what you were saying about stablecoin. Most of the tools that they need to impose total financial control, you're right, are already in place. That was one of the problems with the Genius Act. It acknowledges and reinforces what is already a draconian regulatory regime. It specifically strengthens the Bank Secrecy Act, the Patriot Act. That's catastrophic. So one thing I always say to people, look, we've got to oppose stablecoin, but we've got to roll back that regulatory regime. It's very bad. But the thing about stablecoin, though, I use the metaphor of a nail in the coffin, and to my thinking, maybe it's the last or one of the last nails. So I'm really saying what you're saying, Ellen. Most of the nails are already in the coffin. We don't realize it, but they're already in there. And so this is the last one. But this is the one that would eliminate cash, would one way or another induce us or draw us away from cash, and that's the last measure that might just catch enough people's attention to wake up the public.
I didn't quite understand your solution about going to all cash, but maybe you'll write
what solution now? What solution?
Or maybe it was Stephen that said that the last thing is to go to all cash, but I didn't quite understand how that would work.
Okay. That was Stephen talking.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That was when you do away with bank created money and you do away with non-bank money where corporations create money market mutual funds, other types of shadow banking activities, derivatives markets. And so if you take away those markets, what are you left with? You're left with just money. It's public money.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah, and then we sort of said, well, how can you call that? Because we're always looking for how to name things. Well, we decided we can just call it cash. What's left is the equivalent of cash. It should be,
Yeah.
and it's not a stable coin that's almost, we're not going to break a dollar with a stable coin, so to speak. No, there should just be cash and people can count on it. And that's all we need.
Okay.
That way.
So, Stephen, I have a question for you. So you're talking about this all cash system. We talked before today about the relevance of colonial Pennsylvania banking, and I think Ellen would agree probably that's a good thing. If we go to, and in my book, I argue that would be, to me, the essential model is what colonial Pennsylvania did. For that 50-year stretch between 1720 roughly and
1723 to 1776. Yeah.
Yeah, that stretch there. That, to me, that's a really good model. So if we were on that model, would we not be essentially just working tier one?
Yes.
Ellen, is that
You
correct,
would be
Ellen?
working tier one because it would all be public money.
Yeah.
And yeah, now there are some people in this audience that are going to have one problem with it.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Colonial Pennsylvania, first of all, well, I love this too much. We only have 5 minutes. We've got to get to other people.
We all love history here.
I know. I'm not going to go there. It's a land, it was 90% of the money was loaned by the government into existence. It was still a tier one money, but they loaned it in there for all productivity. And you had to put up your part of your house or part of your land to get it.
Yeah.
And some people would prefer the government just spending the money into circulation. And that hasn't been worked out in the monetary reform. There's both ideas. I think I won't go there right now. I want to get to other people. John Root, you get your word now.
So I just want to remind people that the Aldrich bill, which was obviously being presented by the banking cartel in New York, was rejected. And because they reformed and gussied up the Aldrich bill and turned it into the Federal Reserve Act, it got through. This is exactly what's happening with CBDC and stablecoin.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Stablecoin is the Federal Reserve Act
all over again.
hiding that it's what they really want. And the thing that I'm most worried about is that just like gold, you don't have to back the stablecoin.
That's right.
You just have to have enough treasuries to cover the demand. And all the stablecoin issuers just have to get together and make sure that they supply each other with the treasuries when they need them.
Yeah. Well,
I'm done.
It's interesting on that point about the BIS. So they were pushing, up until Trump came into office, that every country would issue a CBDC. And then miraculously, the conservatives in this country say, well, we don't want that. So let's go with a retail version in this country only. See, I think we're going to wake up shortly to being in a sea of, surrounded by countries in a sea of CBDC. Everyone around us is going to be having CBDC. But we're going to be this paradise of liberty, or this, last refuge of liberty, because we have retail stablecoin and we know how much we trust our private bankers. When in fact, it's simply a corporate CBDC, which, as you're saying, John, they can hand us over when the time comes. So we're going to get there at this, essentially the same pace as if we had a CBDC. I fear. I don't think there'd be any difference in the speed, and we're hurtling along. And it's not just stable coin. I mean, this is partly to Ellen's point. You have digital ID. I mean, the real ID. You have universal digital ledger. You have biometric with the eye and so forth, identifications, all kinds of ways. They're rapidly integrating all these different forms of digitization. Stablecoin just happens to be the one that will take away, would deny us cash, but it's
Yeah.
happening all around us.
We should be ending right now. We've got just less than 2 minutes. I'm going
Right.
to
Just let me say to
Oh.
hear something completely different, listen
Okay.
to my talk.
Okay. So John's speaking next, and he's inviting you to listen if you can, Joseph,
Okay.
because it'll be another interesting perspective. Okay, no, I'm going to give the last word to Patrick, actually. You got 1 minute. I'm holding it to you, Patrick. You got just 1 minute, young man. If he's there. I don't see Patrick. Nope, you haven't unmuted. Okay, Joe, you're next. Sorry, Joe.
So you mentioned that Griffin was unreliable. Are you aware of his chapter on Iron Mountain?
No, I'm not saying not totally unreliable. There's a lot of good in Griffin.
I'm not saying.
the book.
I'm just asking you
No,
about the
I'm
Iron
not
Mountain
aware.
chapter.
No, I'm not aware. But
So
he
the
does a
Iron
lot.
Mountain chapter. The Iron Mountain chapter. He totally endorses that conspiracy that's going on. And in fact, it was a satire, purposely written.
Oh, yeah, right.
That was so. That's another. If you weren't aware of it, that's another area.
Oh,
As
yeah,
far
yeah.
as this, as far as the stable coin is concerned, what I think what there's we have Ronnie Phillips here, and he's an expert in this stuff, and we really should hear from him. But as I understand it, the stable coin is popular in the minds of the government because there'll be a great demand for their bonds, which will lower the rates, and as there will be a way of making sure that all those bonds are covered, as you've already said. But the lower rates is a big factor.
It is a big factor. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
They're looking for that. I'm glad to hear that you are a supporter of sovereign money. But your interpretation of CBDCs, I think, is quite erroneous, and stablecoin in the sense of everything that we use, every tool we have has to be regulated or it'll be abused. And all of the things that you're concerned about can be regulated out of existence, just like cars. The death rate in cars has come down by 100% or 50% because we regulate it like crazy. We've got special brakes and airbags and seat belts and special construction. You can do the same thing with anything. You can regulate them and protect them. That's what the Constitution's for, to protect the people from the abuse of political power. And that can be done. I think you're being an alarmist in saying those things.
I don't agree at all, Patrick. But let me just say one thing, though. Just instead of arguing back and forth, can I just bring something up which I shared with Stephen before, something that Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene had said, which I wish we'd had time to go into. Maybe Patrick could, respond.
Go ahead.
A couple of days after the Genius Act passed, she was accosted by a journalist. She's on the Capitol steps, literally, and she says, well, the speaker did not allow us to input amendments to the Genius Act to protect us from a backdoor CBDC. But then she also says something that I thought very interesting. That's why I want to draw your attention to it. She said, we were not allowed to protect a public chain of custody, that we could not secure for the public a secure chain of custody to them. We could not put an amendment that would require a technical fix, a regulation that you're talking about that would protect the public. And I want to hear about that. What would that look like?
Yeah, let me make a comment back because we're way over out of time, and I'm going to take my moderator's perspective and do that if I can.
We're over time, I know.
Yeah, I know. Just real quick though,
I'll ask my question real quick, Stephen. It's a very basic question, and it has to do with the graph about the U.S. debt. And you said that's 40% of GDP. I agree, it's unprecedented. It's very high. But private debt held by the public, not in the government's deficits, but in private debt instruments, is 100% of GDP. Yeah. It's at an unprecedented level. My question is simple, just straightforward question. Most economists think that that is a far greater risk to our economy because of the liquidity mismatch, the non-transparency.
You mean the private debt, the private debt.
The private debt.
Well, see, this is very interesting. This is an interesting point because the conservatives, the ones who are politically inclined but not economically inclined, don't get that. They think they focus on the public debt. They don't look at the private debt. I'm with you because when I look at the economic history, private debts tend to drive the crises, and then the government has to fix the problem. And next, we have a bigger government debt, but the problems start on the private side. In fact. Right. I think there's.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And we did this already with Jay Cook financing Northern Pacific with direct to consumer sales of bonds, which Richard White at Stanford said was crypto in the 1870s and 80s. And
this is the neoliberals are trying to keep us off the scent. They keep saying, oh, the problem's with the public debt. It's not the private, because they want to keep living off of the government, living off the taxpayer, getting away with this, being bailed out. They don't want attention drawn to them.
And the basic problem with Jay Cook is
what's that?
Jay Cook put us into a 5-year almost global depression, and it was because of speculative lending that looks an awful lot like stablecoin and these high levels of private debt.
You see, but the neoliberal, I have a chart here, it's too late now, but what is interesting to me is that there was a point in 1980, Stephen, I don't know if you've seen that chart, but there's in 1980, public and private debt, which I have in my book, I'm always looking at the two in combination, were approximately the same level. This is around 1980, as they were at the height of the Great Depression. All right. So if you ask me, the last thing you want to do is let the total debt, public and private debt, climb any higher, right? That's the last thing you want to do. And what do? You deregulate. You allow more private debt to accumulate.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly right.
This is a total refutation of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a disaster. I'm sorry, I'm losing my composure here. I'm so upset thinking about it. The neoliberals are a disaster.
Okay.
I mean, look at the chart.
We're going to continue this. We got a lot more. We're just starting this relationship. So we'll continue to find ways of going forward arm in arm.
Yeah.
Or it can be buddy, however you want.
Listen, it's a thrill to talk to Ellen Brown. Wow. I get to finally see her. I like what she does.
Well,
I like Griffin too. It's not that I say he's totally of no value. He is of great value, but I'll tell you, he kept me in the dark for 20 years. Well,
listen,
he didn't do it all himself.
And I enjoyed it as like a mystery theater, and the tension, and we're all going to Jungle Island. Okay, taking a break.